What's up, guys? 0-1 yesterday. What else is new is Jake Irvin had inexplicably bad start. I mean, it made sense that he would regress a little bit from the previous performance against the same team, but not to that extent. And I thought it made sense that Quintana would also take a step back and that his numbers didn't even indicate that he was really that good in the prior game. But that did not happen, and he actually pitched well, and that was a loss. And then, of course, Washington has to tease you right near the end with three. I think they put up a 3 spot in the ninth inning when they were dead. It was 7-2, and then all of a sudden it's like 7-5. Like, hey, you actually have a chance here. No, not really. Like, don't even tease me, man. Just lose. And then the Red Sox game was kind of surprising. I didn't bet on that one, but I mentioned that Red Sox were, I thought, in a fade spot, and it almost turned out that way, even though they had an 11-2 lead, and Bayo was totally dominating at some points. He had 10 straight strikeouts, I think, at one point, or 10 straight outs via the strikeout. But I guess some runners reach base in between those. But I think he wound up giving up 5 runs, even though he had that ridiculous strikeout performance, wound up with 11 strikeouts. He still almost allowed them to blow like a giant lead. An 11-2 lead all of a sudden became, I don't know, they won like 12-9. It's just wild. All right, let's look at today's slate. I'm trying not to mess around here, man. I'm just going right to it. I have one game that I'm playing here, and it is a full game total, and it is going to be on the under in game 2 of Minnesota-Chicago. So we have 2 doubleheaders today between Kansas City and St. Louis, and Kansas City, I think, has shuffled their rotation. So Waco was supposed to pitch yesterday against whoever Kansas City starter is in the first game today, I think. I don't even know who's starting at this point. It was supposed to be Waka against, let me see, against, Palante, I guess, in game 1. But now game 1 is going to be Marsh against Palante, which is a little bit more interesting maybe because I don't think Palante is that good. You don't know what you're going to get out of him really or how many innings you're going to get. And Marsh has been okay at points this year. He has decent stats. Sort of, although his whip is a little bit higher than I'd like. But St. Louis hasn't seen him before. It looks like there is a little bit of movement against St. Louis there. So that's interesting. Potentially could look into playing Kansas City in the first game there. And then Waka's moved to the second game of that doubleheader, and that's going to be against Sonny Gray, where I think that's a pitching mismatch because Waka, even though he's been okay this year, his stats against St. Louis, his former team, are not good at all. And I think he's the worst of the 2 starters, even though they're both getting up there in age. Sonny Gray has been pitching really well this year for St. Louis. And I think his numbers against Kansas City are better than Waka's against St. Louis. So I think that's a mismatch in the second game. But St. Louis, I assume, is a decent size favorite in that one. I'm going to the total in the other game, though. Like I said, Minnesota and the White Sox. We got the first game is Ober against Fedde. So I'm going to take the under in game 2, not the Ober game, but game 2, which is Thorpe and Lopez and Thorpe. But I'll get to that in a second. Game 1, the hope here, because we don't know what's going to happen in game 1, first of all. The hope here is going to be that the hitters get tired, first of all, in game 1, enough so that they don't hit as well in game 2, which is sometimes the case. I haven't looked. It's hard to find historical Major League Baseball stats on totals in second games of doubleheaders. I'm sure they're out there because I would expect them to actually tend to be a little bit more low scoring because the hitters kind of get tired out in the first game, where you would kind of expect the opposite. That, the bullpens get used in the first game and they're not going to be as good in game 2. Well, I think it's more so that the hitters are tired and they have to play again in game 2. And sometimes some of the hitters get benched in game 2 because some of the hitters will get rested, so they don't have to play 2 entire games. So I think that's more of a factor because the bullpen scenario, the teams are still going to use relievers in game 2 who are fresh out of the bullpen. They're not really going to reuse any guys that they use in game 1, although I guess the thought would be that maybe they use up their bullpens in game 1. But I don't think so. I think it probably does have a tendency to be more towards the under. That's where I'm going here, but a lot of it has to do with the starting pitching matchup too. But in game 1, what we're going to hope, though, is that the bullpens don't get really overused in game 1. That would be the hope. Game 1 is Bailey Ober, which I've been talking about how I like Ober. It's maybe a little bit of a concern that he's coming off a 100-pitch outing where he usually doesn't quite go that far. And the last time he threw over 100 pitches was a good start, 10 strikeout, 1 hit performance against Toronto. And then he came out and didn't have a good game the next time out against Cleveland. But of course, Cleveland is a much better hitting team than the White Sox, so maybe that's not going to be something that happens again. I don't know, but Ober has been pitching really well for a few straight games now, and he's kind of coming back into form. I've said that Ober, when he had a high ERA throughout the earlier part of the season, I said I don't think that that's really indicative of what he is, because he's got a 1.1 ERA, so his whip, 1.1 whip. So his ERA even being in the fours is actually kind of misleading. And with Minnesota, since he's been up there since 2021. He's been in the majors all with Minnesota. And overall, he's got a 1.1 ERA for his entire, or 1.1 whip, for his entire career, and 3.75 ERA. So all good stats, and a good 4.8 strikeout to walk ratio, and more strikeouts than innings pitched. So a high strikeout rate. So throughout his career, he's been pretty good. So I think he's rounding back into form. He's only a 28-year-old. So the hope is that he can get the job done in this first game against the White Sox. The White Sox are very familiar with him, but he does have a 27-2 strikeout walk ratio against them, and has held them to a pretty low 253 batting average and 99 at bats. So even though they have seen him a lot, White Sox not a very good hitting team. They've only hit him to 253 batting average and a 661 OPS, which is also still pretty low, especially given the fact that he's allowed 4 home runs against him. So hopefully Ober can do okay and get deep into that game. And then Fetty is pitching on the other side. He's having a good season, man, from out of nowhere. And I don't know if we can trust that he's going to continue that, really, but hopefully he can at least do decently in the first game to save the rest of their pen. Fetty, it's very strange because he's been in the league since 2017, all with the Washington Nationals. His ERA with the Nationals, his career ERA, even including this decent season that he's having so far, is still almost 5, and his whip is still almost 1.5 over his career. So his career stats are awful, and it doesn't explain how, as a 31-year-old, he's just all of a sudden giving us a 3.13 ERA and 1.13 whip. I don't quite get that, although his strikeout number is still a little bit low this season, but it is up from where it has been over his career. And his walk number I don't know if it's gone down really, but his walk number is still a little bit high, I guess. But he's been tougher to hit, I guess. But as a 31-year-old, I don't think you all of a sudden just change, although maybe the change in environment, going to a new team, maybe the pitching coaches have discovered something, and maybe it is legitimate. I don't know. But for these purposes, because I'm not betting on the Ober-Fetty game, but I'm just hoping that the bullpens don't get used that much in it. So hopefully Fetty actually continues his pitching well, his pitching ways. I guess he's faced Minnesota once this season, held them to no runs, 3 hits and 11 strikeouts, no walks, and a 6-inning performance on the road at Minnesota. So he had a good start there. But even including that start, his career against these Minnesota hitters are awful. These numbers are not good. In 33 at bats, Minnesota they hit 303 off of him, although with no home runs off him. So only a 737 OPS, which is not ridiculously high, but the 303 batting average isn't great. But he pitched well against them the one time out this year, but that does mean that Minnesota has now seen him once this year, so they kind of know maybe if he's made some changes, they might know what to expect there. But either way, I'm talking too much about a game I'm not even playing. Hopefully those starters go deep enough into that game to save the bullpens, because I'm taking the under in Game 2 of this doubleheader between Minnesota and the White Sox. I don't see percentages on this yet, and I see the line just sitting at 8, juiced to the under at -115, which it looks like is predominantly out there. That's the number you can get. I think it might make sense to take it. I think it is possible that more of the tickets, the higher percentage of tickets actually does come in on the over in this one, because Minnesota has actually been hitting decently, even though the public doesn't know the White Sox can't hit. But that might be Minnesota's decent offense might be enough to actually have the public looking to play an over here. But I, of course, am looking in the other direction. Pablo Lopez is pitching for Minnesota, and maybe we're getting a little bit of a bargain on the total here in this game, because the starting pitching matchup maybe is better than it appears to be on the surface on both sides of it. Lopez has a 5.18 ERA this year, which you look at that and that looks awful, but he's got a 1.19 whip. So that indicates he's actually pitching well, and he has a 116-22 strikeout walk ratio this season too, and only allowed 96 hits in 99 innings pitched. So he has a really high strikeout rate, a good strikeout walk ratio, and hasn't allowed that many hits. So what gives? How is his ERA this high? Well, he's allowed 17 home runs, so that's really what's doing it. That's the problem. Excuse me. Lopez, but the rest of his stats would indicate that he's actually pitching pretty well this year. He did have one bad outing against the White Sox, which kind of concerns me, where he only went 4 innings and gave up 3 earned runs. He only gave up 4 hits in that game, though. Had a 6.2 strikeout walk ratio and actually only 76 pitches thrown in that game. So I actually don't know why he got taken out of that game. Maybe it was maybe there was a rain delay. I don't know what that was there, but Lopez, his stats are better than it appears. I am a little bit concerned that he's had a few games where he hasn't gone deep into the games, but he seems to have maybe started turning it on again recently. And well, even in the month of June, even including some starts where he gave up some runs as usual, he still had a 35.9 strikeout walk ratio and only allowed 22 hits in 27 innings in the month of June. So that still looks pretty good to me, even though he did give up some runs. And he had a couple good starts in a row against Oakland and Seattle where he just blew them away basically and had 23 strikeouts and only 2 walks in those 2 games and only gave up 6 hits in 14 innings. Then he regressed again and didn't have a great start against Houston where he got 6 earned runs in 5 innings on 8 hits, 2 walks, put too many men on base for sure, and did still have 6 strikeouts in that one. But Houston's offense is pretty good. Lopez had a pretty good history against Houston, and Houston had just seen him on May 31st. So maybe and he pitched really well against him in that game. So maybe that had something to do with it. Houston was ready to go and ready to hit him this time because they had just seen him. For the White Sox, that's not really going to be the case. The White Sox haven't seen him since April 23rd. And like I said, he didn't do that well in that game. And I think the start was actually cut short. So I like Lopez here. His numbers overall are good. And his numbers against the White Sox historically are good. We have a big sample size here. So even though the White Sox are not unfamiliar with him at all, they're still only 16 for 71 off him lifetime. 4 doubles, 5 home runs, 14 RBIs. He's got a 21-4 strikeout walk ratio against him. Holds them to a low 225 batting average, although a 760 OPS because of the home runs. Again, Lopez's problems are giving up the long ball, man. And I tend to think the long balls are a little bit fluky, so I tend to weigh those things a little bit less. So hopefully he's able to keep that in check here because that 760 OPS is a little bit high, especially when you have a 225 batting average against. But I'm going to lean more towards the batting average in this case than home runs, which tend to be less predictable. So I like Lopez on that side of it. And the White Sox offense hopefully will be held down a little bit. But of course, this is an under, so you need both sides of this. And Drew Thorpe is on the other side of this. And I've mentioned him on this channel before. I think he's a decent pitcher, man. He's not to be confused with Paul Skeens, though, because he's got a similar mustache going on. So the stash comes out there, and it just makes you think he's going to come out and dominate. Drew Thorpe is not Paul Skeens. He's not coming out here and throwing 100 miles an hour. But what he is doing is throwing in the 90s, and he's throwing a really nice changeup. As I've mentioned, Thorpe, one of his best pitches is the changeup that he throws out of basically the same arm slot as the fastball, so the hitters don't realize it's a changeup coming. It has different movement, and it's significantly slower, so that can fool hitters. He's stringing together an okay rookie season so far in some ways with a 3.71 ERA and 1.13 whip, so that's all good. But his strikeout rate is low and his walk numbers are too high, but that seems to have gone down a little bit in his last couple of outings, and it hasn't really resulted in damage on the scoreboard either. So he has an 18-14 strikeout walk ratio in 26 and 2/3 innings. That concerns me, but he's also only allowed 16 hits, so he's been pretty difficult to hit. It's a small sample size, so it's hard to say. And I don't think he was as wild in the minors as he has been so far in the majors. So I kind of expect those walk numbers to go down a little bit. He gave up 7 earned runs in a start on the road at Arizona, which they have a decent offense, and that's a tough place to play. And in his other 4 starts, he's allowed 1, 0, 2, and 1 earned run in all those other starts. Although they were against bad offenses in Seattle, Colorado, and Miami for some of them, and then Detroit, who I guess are mediocre, and he walked 4 guys in that one. But we'll see what happens here, but I do think he's an interesting, decent young pitcher with decent stuff. And the thing we have going for him in this game on his side is that the Minnesota hitters, even though they have a decent offense, they have not seen Thorpe yet ever before in a live major league game. So I always talk about how that's an advantage to the pitcher the first time or first couple times they face these hitters because the hitters don't know what to expect. They have to figure the pitcher out, have to adjust to it. So usually the pitcher tends to do a little bit better And maybe that's what's carrying Thorpe so far in his young rookie season here so far. But I like the pitching matchup for those reasons. Like I said, I think it's conducive to the under. And I think because you have Lopez with a misleadingly high ERA and Thorpe, who people don't really know who he is, I think you might be getting a little bit of a deal on the under in this one. And it's game 2 of the doubleheader, so hopefully we have some tired bats coming into this one. And I got to stop this slide, man. This is like a slow descent into madness. So let's get this done. Let's do it. This is the only play. Minnesota, Chicago White Sox, game 2. Lopez versus Thorpe, under 8, -115. Peace.